안녕하세요.
Joo Hyun, CEO of the most powerful technology company in the country, was the kind of man who seemed to have everything. His empire was constantly expanding. His word was law, and his sharp, calculating eyes never went unnoticed. He knew how to command a room and never hesitated to use his position to secure what he wanted. However, over the years, he had become a solitary figure, surrounded by executives and employees who saw him only as a ruthless boss. His life was dominated by numbers, reports, and endless meetings, but deep down, he knew something was missing. Something he couldn't quite name but felt every night when he returned to his empty home. Soo Bin, on the other hand, was an ordinary woman with a sweet smile and eyes full of hope. She worked as a secretary at the same company where Joo Hyun was president, but her life was vastly different from his. She lived in a small apartment, wore simple clothes, and carried out her daily tasks with constant effort. There was no luxury in her routine. Mornings were spent among papers and phone calls, and she rarely had time to think about anything beyond her work. Soo Bin knew her place was behind a desk, handling the company's details, and she had never aspired to more than that. Everything changed, however, on a cold and rainy morning. Joo Hyun arrived early at the office for an important investor meeting, his imposing steps echoing through the corridors. Soo Bin was at the reception desk, organizing some documents when he walked in hurriedly. She quickly stood up to greet him, as she always did with visitors, but something made her hesitate when she looked at him. Joo Hyun's gaze was different from that of everyone else. There was an unusual intensity in his eyes, a curiosity she hadn't expected. He observed her with more attention than she was used to. "Soo Bin, isn't it?" he asked, his deep voice steady and commanding. It was a simple question, yet he said it with a strangely disarming calmness. She looked at him, surprised that he remembered her name. It wasn't common for the CEO to care about the names of employees. "Yes, sir. How can I assist you?" "I need some documents for the meeting. Can you accompany me to the conference room?" His voice was firm, but there was something in the way he spoke that made Soo Bin feel important. She was speechless for a moment. Normally, she would simply hand the papers to an assistant, but she didn't want to seem disrespectful. "Of course, sir. I'll get them right away." The walk to the elevator felt longer than it really was. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Soo Bin could feel the weight of his presence beside her. It was a strange sensation, as if the world around her had shrunk, leaving just the two of them alone in an uncertain silence. She tried not to overthink the fact that the CEO was so close, but the tension in the air was undeniable. When they reached the meeting floor, Joo Hyun turned to her, a softer look in his eyes than she had expected. "You do an excellent job, Soo Bin. I'm impressed by your dedication," he said, his tone now lighter, almost friendly. Soo Bin, caught off guard, looked at him, unsure of what to say. She had always been dedicated to her work, but she had never imagined someone like him would notice. "Ah, thank you, sir. I'm happy to help." He gave a small smile, one that almost seemed genuine before stepping into the conference room. "I hope you continue like this." Soo Bin watched his silhouette disappear through the door, still absorbing his words. There was something in his gaze, something in his voice, that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. She didn't know why, but her mind couldn't stop replaying that brief encounter. Her heart was beating faster, and a feeling of confusion washed over her. She knew that what had happened was nothing more than a professional interaction, but there was something about his demeanor, a fleeting vulnerability in Joo Hyun's eyes, that made her doubt her own assumptions. He was a man of power, untouchable to someone like her, but the way he had spoken to her felt somehow different. The days passed like a series of unexpected moments. The connection between Joo Hyun and Soo Bin grew stronger, yet harder to ignore. Soo Bin was aware of what was happening, but she struggled to maintain professionalism. Every day she felt more uneasy in her position, especially as her relationship with the CEO became more intense. Joo Hyun wasn't making it any easier. He seemed increasingly interested in her, and that made her nervous. That day, Joo Hyun sought her out again. They were in a high-level management meeting, and Soo Bin was responsible for taking notes and organizing the agenda. He glanced at her once more, his eyes almost challenging, and somehow he couldn't look away. She seemed so focused on her work, so diligent, yet there was something about her posture that drew his attention in an unusual way. He felt the need to speak with her, but the moment wasn't right. After the meeting, when everyone had left, Ju Hyun approached her desk, breaking the silence that lingered in the room. "Soo-bin," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "I need you in my office. Now." She looked up at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Yes, sir," she responded, trying to maintain her composure. When they reached Ju Hyun's office, he gestured for her to sit, but she hesitated. He noticed the tension in her, the way she grew nervous around him. "Don't worry, you're among colleagues. We're just talking," he said, trying to ease the atmosphere. Soo-bin sat down, but the tightness in her stomach remained. She didn't know what he wanted, but she knew it wouldn't be something simple. "You've been doing an excellent job, Soo-bin," he began, and the way he said it made her heart race. "I truly appreciate your dedication." She forced a polite smile. "Thank you, sir. It's my job." Ju Hyun studied her for a moment, his gaze deep and intense, as if trying to decipher something hidden within her. "I know it's your job," he replied, leaning in slightly. "But something tells me you are much more than just an employee." Soo-bin felt the color drain from her face. He was speaking so directly, so closely, that she didn't know how to react. I don't understand, sir." Ju Hyun's eyes never wavered. There was something in his stare that made her feel vulnerable. "I'm talking about what I see in you. You're not just the efficient secretary, you're a woman who catches my attention. Do you understand?" His words pushed Soo-bin to the edge of what she could handle. She didn't know how to respond. It was too much. She was beginning to realize what he felt for her, but she didn't know how to deal with it. I don't think this is appropriate," she said, trying to maintain her professional stance. "We're just colleagues." But Ju Hyun wasn't convinced. He didn't want to believe that what he felt was just an illusion or a fleeting attraction. He wanted more. He needed to understand if this was real. "Soo-bin," he began again, his voice softer this time. "I don't want this to be a problem, but I can't just ignore what's happening between us." The tension in the room was palpable. Soo-bin was torn. On one hand, she felt something for him, something that made her feel alive, something she never imagined she would feel for someone like Ju Hyun. But on the other hand, she knew this couldn't happen. The barriers between them were too great. He was a billionaire CEO, and she was just an employee. "I understand what you're saying," she said, her voice trembling. "But this can't happen, Ju Hyun. We both know that." He looked at her for a moment, and then something shifted in his expression. He seemed to understand what she was feeling, but the need to be closer to her still lingered. "You're right," he finally said, exhaling. "I knew this would be complicated, but I can't push away what I feel." The atmosphere between them grew heavier. They were so close, yet at the same time, so distant. And the hardest part was knowing that there was something real between them, but life's circumstances kept them apart. "Let's take some time to think about this," Ju Hyun suggested, breaking the silence. "I don't want you to feel pressured." Soo-bin nodded, relieved but also heartbroken. She knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far more complicated. The following days passed quickly, but the feeling of discomfort and confusion continued to haunt Soo-bin. At work, she remained as dedicated as ever, yet her mind unconsciously drifted towards CEO Ju Hyun. His smile, his deep gaze, and that unexpected compliment still echoed in her head. She tried not to overthink it. She knew he was a powerful man, far removed from her reality. Her world as a secretary, surrounded by ordinary people, did not mix with his, but there was something in his gaze that seemed to cross the barriers of hierarchy. And that was precisely what began to scare her. She couldn't allow herself to think that the CEO saw her as anything more than an employee. He was accustomed to women of his status, people from the same privileged background. Soo-bin knew she had no place in that world, and as much as his attention made her feel unique, she tried to push the thoughts aside and focus on work. The problem was that the more she tried to dismiss the idea that he might be interested in her, the more she found herself drawn to him. Ju Hyun, on the other hand, also felt the weight of that interaction. During the investor meeting, He could hardly focus on the numbers or presentations. His mind wandered, replaying the image of Subin in his thoughts. He wasn't used to being distracted by an employee, but there was something about her that pulled him in. It was her calmness, the way she remained composed amid chaos, the quiet sparkle in her eyes. She was a simple woman, yet there was a depth to her that he couldn't quite decipher, and that mystery fascinated him. The next day, during a coffee break, Ju Hyun decided to do something he normally wouldn't seek her out. He walked to the secretary's office, where Subin was seated, reviewing some documents. She looked up when he entered, her heart pounding in her chest. To her, the CEO was a distant figure, and seeing Ju Hyun so close made her uneasy. But he didn't seem uncomfortable. On the contrary, he was calm, almost relaxed. "Subin," he began, his voice soft yet firm, "I need you to arrange a meeting with the finance department. We have some urgent matters to address." She nodded quickly, feeling the weight of the moment. "Of course, sir. I'll take care of it right away." Ju Hyun made an almost imperceptible movement, as if hesitating before speaking again. "I know this isn't usually part of your responsibilities, but I trust you." He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze so intense that she didn't know how to respond. "Can I count on you?" Subin swallowed hard. It was difficult for her to process his attention. "Yes, sir, of course." He gave a faint smile, and before leaving, he turned back one last time to look at her. "Thank you, Subin." What Ju Hyun didn't realize was how deeply this small gesture affected her. A whirlwind of emotions stirred within her, something between gratitude and an inexplicable apprehension. He treated her with more consideration than any other superior had, making her feel both special and vulnerable at the same time. Deep in her heart, she began to wonder if he truly saw her as just an employee. But that thought seemed so far from her reality. That subtle gesture, that quiet praise, had started to chip away at the barriers between them. To Subin, he had always been an untouchable figure. But now, more than ever, she found herself questioning, what if it were possible for him to see her differently? Meanwhile, Ju Hyun was losing the battle within himself. He wanted to understand what he was feeling, to rationalize the growing attraction he felt for Subin, but he couldn't. She represented everything he wasn't supposed to desire, yet there was something about her that made him feel more human, more real. He knew his feelings were complicated, and that the hierarchy between them wouldn't make things easy, but he couldn't deny what was happening inside him. The tension between them grew as they both tried to ignore the undeniable connection forming, but the more they denied it, the stronger it became. It was inevitable. Fate was leading them down a path neither of them could have predicted.
You're my eternal blue.